Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large, coming at you for another rock'em sock'em episode of podcasting greatness on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and with video here on YouTube. Okay, guys, it is the return of the Three Apostates. Hello, Jonathan. Hello, Lloyd.
Hello.
Hey, Chris, Lloyd. It's great to be back.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be with you gentlemen again to discuss many profound things.
Exactly. And this week it is going to be actually kind of fun. I think this is going to be pretty interesting. But a kind of a dark topic, actually. We're gonna be a little light about this, I think, but this is actually a little bit on the dark side. And what we're talking about here is child indoctrination within our groups. And this is actually a thing. Now, Scientology actually lags behind on this one, and I think we're going to be hearing a lot from Jonathan and Lloyd in this episode. I'll have a few things to throw in here, and we're also going to experiment a little bit with some Zoom functions here, because what I want to do is show you guys while we're going through the episode here this week. We're gonna play some little snippets from some videos that have been posted from our groups and from others to demonstrate what we're talking about with child indoctrination. So first off, before we even get into that, let us introduce ourselves for those who don't know who we are and what the Three Apostates is all about. John, you want to go
people
first?
Don't know who we are by now, then shame
Well,
on them. I'm not going to fill in gaps in their knowledge. You know, for goodness sake, catch
Well,
up.
some of us don't have egos as big as a bunker, so
That's
we
true.
can do that, you know. So I'm John Streeter. I was raised as a Mormon and kind of got into studying the history and studying other groups and how they function, and decided that my pathway was going to be something different from Mormonism. And in the meantime, started blogging and podcasting, and was able to connect with these other two fine gentlemen, Chris and Lloyd, from their respective groups. And I've really enjoyed kind of comparing and contrasting the experience that I had in Mormonism with Scientology and JDubs.
My name's Lloyd Evans, and many years ago I decided to embark on a path that would lead me to world domination, and I decided the easiest way to do that was to become an ex-Jehovah's Witness activist. And to that end, I founded the website jwsurvey.org. I run the YouTube channel John Cedars, which you should absolutely subscribe to. And no, this isn't a shameless attempt at stealing Chris's subscribers. And I am the author of the book The Reluctant Apostate, which you can check out on Amazon.
Beautiful. Yeah, it would be no problem at all for everybody to subscribe to both of these guys' channels. They put out some amazing stuff. Okay, child indoctrination. Let's go ahead and get right into it. So
Now, Chris, before we start that, why is Scientology different? Tell us a little bit about why there's not as much of an impact in child indoctrination in Scientology. What is it about Scientology that makes that the case?
I think it has to do with the fact that they haven't yet realized the potential market. You know, they are a little slow. There are not a lot of folks up at the top of Scientology who are actually doing all the work, and so they're always struggling, always behind. And so what they've really only done over the years is a few courses, a few classes specifically designed for kids. No video work, really, no cartoons, no overt attempt to, provide a path of indoctrination into L. Ron Hubbard personally or Scientology concepts as such. There's very little work on this. There's really only a children's communications class, a children's grammar and communications class, and some study classes for children to learn how to learn. And that's
Forgive
actually,
me if I'm wrong, Chris,
yeah.
But aren't children mostly a nuisance to Scientology? Because don't they kind of try and, even encourage abortions if necessary to kind of make it easier for people to join and work for the Sea Org?
Yes, the Sea Org specifically is definitely anti-kids. There's just no other name for the attitude that Sea Org members have for kids. They don't like kids. That kids are what are called dev-T. They're developed traffic. They are unnecessary in the course of spiritual salvation, right? And so they really don't have a thing about it. Now I got to be clear though that that's Sea Org, and Sea Org is sort of your your clergy of Scientology as opposed to the public Scientologists who love kids. They have families, they raise their kids and all that. But as far as the church putting out Scientology materials to teach children about Scientology, this is actually an area they've really lagged behind on compared to the other groups here. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And I do think that attitude, Lloyd, has something to do with it, because the person who would decide, okay, this is a market we need to get into, this is a thing we need to be doing, this is an effort we need to be making, that would be David Miscavige. And David Miscavige is terrified of kids, apparently.
Well, if again, I mean, you say that there's a difference between the Sea Org and ordinary parishioners, and I get that. But if it's ultimately the people in the Sea Org who are going to make decisions about the extent to which they want to indoctrinate children, and if they're in an environment where children are virtually loathed, it's quite easy to understand why they would overlook this huge potential market of new converts. Because with Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm sure to some extent with Mormons, it's entirely the opposite. They see children as an opportunity for bare minimum the organization to keep its head above water, hopefully for the organization to thrive, because they, I think, understand at some level that the preaching work is achieving virtually nothing. So their best chance of growing is to just churn out babies.
I think you're absolutely right about that, and I think that the thing that Scientology has recognized that kids are useful for is proxy donors for their parents, right? Get your kids their lifetime International Association of Scientologists membership when they're 3 or 4 years old, right? That's like $5,000. Get your kids get their lifetime membership, right, in the Church of Scientology. Get their bridge paid for. Get all their services paid for. That's what you do with your kids, and that's how kids are sort of thought of within the Scientology world, is how can we use these kids to get the parents to pony over more money. And other than that, I swear to God, Scientology really hasn't thought about kids at all.
In Mormonism, it's interesting in that it's not really even, it didn't start out as a route to proselytizing or to increasing numbers. It's integral to the theology that children are like crowns in your jewel. And this goes back, I mean, jewels in your crown. This goes back to like even the founder, Joseph Smith, when he was conceiving of a theological framework that would justify polygamy and some of the things that are inherent to Mormonism in its very early days. This idea that we are spirit children of God, and that pattern of Heavenly Father and spirit children is to be repeated by us as the human beings that have the potential to become gods, then the idea that God has billions upon billions of children is kind of muted down to Mormon themselves. And then when you have one man who we've got to create a justification for having multiple wives, part of that justification was to increase the seed and to increase the output that you would have. And so large families are theologically important to it. And then they added layers of meaning on top of that. Like there was a set number of spirits and they needed to come to the earth in righteous Mormon households. And so if you as a woman stopped having babies, then you were preventing spirits from entering into righteous households. And that has all sorts of ways of messing with the minds of adults, with women in particular, about how they are simply vessels for spirits and have no worth beyond that. But it also gives you an elitist notion of that you are better than the rest of the world around you because you are a righteous Mormon household. And it just affects the way that you see the world, the way that you see yourself. And it carries through into Mormonism today, although in subtler terms.
Interesting. There was one other thing I just realized in talking about Scientology and kids that I think is crucial to the difference between our groups, and that is this Scientology attitude that children are actually just adults in little bodies that haven't grown yet. And so when children come into Scientology, they get these, these children's classes that they can do, which are mostly consist of a lot of pictures. They're mostly picture books that teach the concepts, and that's fine as far as children's materials go. But the Scientology attitude at the public level, all the way through the Sea Org, also is these are actually, advanced spiritual entities in little tiny bodies who just need to be reminded of things. They don't need to be taught things so much as they need to be reminded of things. And so that attitude colors every aspect of how children are dealt with in Scientology, and that's also might be one reason why there isn't child-oriented indoctrination materials, because actually what are used are the adult materials, and the kids are just made to suffer through dictionaries and grammar books, and you got to understand it, you got to figure it out, so we got to remind you what all these words mean. And it's kind of like that.
That brings up a really key, I guess, principle that I think I'd like to hear Lloyd's take on and everything. And that is, outside of the world of these religions, I think society has come to terms with the idea that there's a maturation that happens in the mind of a human that allows it to understand consequences, to understand complex thoughts, and to have a degree of autonomy over its own decisions. And, in America, that's generally around age 18. We say somebody's become an adult. You're not able to enter into contracts, or contracts are not respected before age 18. We've come to the point where, for the most part, consent for engaging in sexual activity, there's a hard line drawn at age 18 for these important reasons about a person's ability to understand the consequences of their actions, the implications for other people. And it seems like religions that start this indoctrination at the infant level, or as children, kind of go a bit too far in some aspects. We all understand we have to teach children some things, but Lloyd, what's your take on how Jehovah's Witnesses deal with this issue of critical thinking and autonomy and the ability to make decisions and know right from wrong?
Well, there's no critical thinking. It's just a case of, this is what you're supposed to believe. And I agree that one of the most disgraceful aspects of child indoctrination from the viewpoint of Jehovah's Witnesses and the way they do things is the way the focus is on getting them in the baptism pool as quickly as possible. So there's even a talk by governing body member, my favorite, Tony Morris, in which he basically encourages parents to threaten their teenagers with not getting their driving license until they've been baptized. So it's okay to blackmail your kids into committing to the religion. The ends justify the means, as I'm sure is the case in both of your groups. Mm-hmm. But yeah, everything is geared towards, let's get these kids baptized as quickly as possible, get it done, and then ask questions later. And then once the child is baptized, and in my case, I was baptized at age 11, long before I knew anything about, the intricacies of Jehovah's Witness doctrine and history. It was just understood to me that if I didn't get baptized and Armageddon came, I was toast. So of course I'm gonna, do whatever it takes to survive and to make my family happy. But you raised a good point, Jonathan, that there's a reason why kids aren't allowed to get into employment situations or sign contracts or own property or have sex before a certain age, and it's because they're not ready to do those things. But with Jehovah's Witnesses, they say, forget all that. We need to get these kids baptized as young as possible, and I believe the youngest age that's cited in the publications is 7. So from the age of 7, they're baptizing these kids. And once they are baptized, they are considered as wedded to the organization to the point where they're liable for shunning if they ever leave for any reason. And that's just deeply, deeply wrong.
Okay, so that's you're talking about kind of two different things here, which is you have the indoctrination, which is feeding all of these messages that go into making that decision, that free decision, you know, of your own free will to be baptized. But then there's the psychological and even social and cultural power of what that commitment and have the state of being baptized means for you in terms of your abilities to make decisions in the future. And I think in Mormonism,
I am literally held. Here I am in 2019, and I'm 40 years old, and I'm literally being held to a decision I was coerced into making at the age of 11. If I hadn't been baptized, it would be an entirely different story. And we know of situations in our own family where, let's say, an extended family member is a teenager and they just happen to skip baptism, and they are kind of rebelling a bit, and they're doing all sorts of stuff that, you know, is against Jehovah's Witness rules and would easily get them disfellowshipped. But our extended family who are believing witnesses are talking to them freely because they never got baptized, but shunning Deanna and I because we left as a conscientious decision because we could no longer believe because we were baptized.
That's interesting that the difference between people who make that decision and don't make that decision, we have kind of a parallel for that in Mormonism, but I'm a little bit baffled by the idea that you get to choose when that happens in Jehovah's Witnesses, because in Mormonism, the decision is made for you.
Oh, really?
And that is early in the church history, it was revealed that the age of discernment, the age where you are mature enough to know right from wrong, is 8 years old.
Oh,
and so what putting a date on it does in Mormon culture is that there's this big buildup to when you become 8. You know, if you're about to be 8, then the bishop is going to call you into their office and they're going to start talking to you about what it means to be worthy to be baptized and the covenant that you make. And I think that you'll start to hear the word covenant in Mormon theology very importantly from that point on in your life, because much like you're talking about how baptism changes your relationship to the organization, in Mormonism, once you start making covenants, and baptism is one of those first covenants, then there's a psychological pressure on you, whereas if you ever leave, they can say that you are a covenant breaker. And by the same token, leaders will start talking about apostates or people who left the church with that phrase, covenant breaker or non-covenant keeping, or on the other side, they'll refer to members of the church as covenant keeping.
But who's in the position to sign up to a covenant when they're 8 years old?
Exactly. We don't consider 8-year-olds capable of you know, signing contracts. But even on the flip side of it, let's say that a 9-year-old says, you know, Mom, I was on the internet and I read some stuff about Joseph Smith and I can't agree with any of it. Then suddenly, well, you can't make that decision until you're 18. So if you want to leave the organization, well, you're not mature enough to know or to, you know, figure this stuff out until you turn 18. And so it's a double standard. And it's like many things in these organizations, you know, you're held in a double bind and where you can't use the idea that they have, which is that you're old enough to know the difference between right and wrong in order to choose something other than the group.
Right. That is fascinating. I have the only other thing I can compare here is with Scientologists, it's all about at what point is the child ready to do Scientology services. And I think this also maybe highlights a key difference for us, is that Scientology is all about getting people in to pay money to do services, do classes, and do auditing. And you guys are more, your groups are more about once a person is a professed believer and counted in the rolls, okay, good, we got him, right? Like they don't, like you guys don't necessarily freak out if the family doesn't come to church every Sunday, right? As long as they're still professing belief and membership. Or am I off on that?
You're off on that for Mormonism.
Am I? Okay, so every week you got to show up, or there's something up.
If you don't show up every week, you're going to get spoken to by the elders.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good.
I think the difference you may be thinking of, Chris, is that Scientology services is a transaction that takes place where they do something for you that you've paid for.
Yes.
Whereas I think maybe with Jehovah's Witnesses, but certainly with Mormonism, they get you into the club and then they encourage you to go out and get a career and get educated, get as high paying and lucrative a career as possible, because they know that part of the theological expectations of the group are that you are going to pay a full tithe, which is 10%
That's not the same for
of
us.
your
Yeah.
income.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
they don't have that. You like, it doesn't even if you don't attend meetings, honestly, there's going to be that annual thing where they're checking to see if you're a full tithe payer. Right now, Mormons across the world are getting contacted by their local leadership saying, come in for tithing settlement. And you think it's almost like, oh, it's like taxes or something like that. You meet with the bishop and he looks at you and he says, are you a full tithe payer? And then the pressure's on you to declare whether or not. And there are some people who don't pay tithing throughout the year. And at tithing settlement, they whip out their checkbook and they write a check for 10%. And so one of the things that you'll see in ex-Mormon communities is that people, because you get a little receipt for this, people will show the receipts. Hey, I paid $30,000 in tithing one year. And it's just mind blowing, but that's how the church, it's a farm that exploits people based on spiritual threats, essentially, like you were talking about, Lloyd, where, you know, if you don't agree to get baptized, or once you've been baptized, if you don't stay, then you're under threat of spiritual death in Armageddon or whatever. It's the same sort of thing.
That's actually the whole issue with Jehovah's Witnesses is so different, and I actually cite this as one of my lines of evidence whenever I'm dealing with the question of whether the leadership is cynical or genuinely deluded, because my argument is that one of the leading lines of evidence that they are genuinely deluded rather than pulling a deliberate scam is that even though they know, or they must know, that their best chance is to indoctrinate kids so that kids can sustain the organization, all they are interested in is the loyalty of the children and making sure that the children pledge themselves to the organization and are willing to recruit for the organization as young as possible, straight out of high school if necessary. They actively dissuade young people from going through higher education and from getting well-paid jobs. The ideal scenario for a young witness man would be that he gets a job as a window cleaner or just something very simple like that that will allow him to sustain a career as a pioneer, so that he's doing 70 hours per week preaching and the rest of the time he's doing this part-time window cleaning job. That would be the ideal model for a young Jehovah's Witness man. And I think the fact that they aren't realizing that it's in their interests to encourage these young witnesses to go out and get well-paying jobs. They're more concerned about the threat of them going through university and learning critical thinking. That, in a way, convinces me that it's not as simple as saying, oh, that they must be cynical. I think to some extent they are cynical, but I think it's far more nuanced. And generally speaking, I think the leadership genuinely believes that they are spokespersons for God and that Armageddon is coming, and that surviving Armageddon depends on Jehovah's Witnesses, including young Jehovah's Witnesses, being as close to the organization as possible.
Interesting. Let me just throw in here for a second, because I think that Scientologists are closer to JWs than Mormons. And I think it's due more to short-sightedness than anything else for Scientology. I mean, they've only been around for 50, 60 years, right? So they're very, very much still in scrape and scrabble and make the money and, you know, and let's get big mode for Scientology. And so their whole interest, if we paint a picture of an ideal picture for a young person in Scientology, it is to join staff, not go to higher education, definitely not. Hubbard poo-pooed colleges, and I personally used those quotes from L. Ron Hubbard to discourage people from higher education when I was trying to recruit them to be staff members or Sea Org members. And that's the ultimate ideal, is that they grow up and they sign that billion-year contract, and then they join the Sea Org and they are lifetime members of that, because they're just still in pure Scrabble survival mode of too few people trying to do too much work, and that's their attitude about it. And I need to point out real fast before I forget that Jonathan's mentioned many times, you know, contract law and signing contracts. Nobody in Scientology cares about that. Kids sign contracts for the Sea Org, for classes, for courses. They have to have parental permission, of course, as well, to make it legal. But they are eager to have children learn responsibility and learn to sign on the dotted line and take responsibility, quote unquote, for their own actions and all of that, because of that persistent attitude of they're adults in little bodies, and that's how they're treated.
See, I think that's a common theme here, and that is that these groups are short-circuiting the notion of autonomy and free agency by inserting themselves into that process for the individual, giving them a distorted view of what autonomy and free agency and accountability are, and putting this paradigm so that the individuals think that that's what they're participating in, when underneath it all, there's this real spiritual coercion that's happening. So in Mormonism, there's this idea that, you know, you reach the age of accountability, you're able to tell the difference between right and wrong, but the choice that is presented to you is that the right thing to do is to get baptized, and the wrong thing to do that would disappoint your family, that would deprive you of the spiritual benefits of the Holy Ghost and all of the things that go along with being baptized and going on that covenant path, that is a wicked choice. And so in almost this fetish of free agency, you'll see parents post on Facebook a picture of their 8-year-old child in white, just coming out of the baptismal font or about to be in the baptismal font, with the celebratory caption, you know, my daughter or son chose freely to be baptized. Without, and people who aren't familiar with the theology and doctrine may not understand that that choice was one between disappointing your entire family, not living up to God's promises and God's hopes. You know, what is an 8-year-old supposed to do at that point?
Well, it's not a choice, is it? It's
no,
like
it's not.
Saying you chose to not be destroyed in Armageddon and to survive into the paradise. It's not a choice.
No.
Any more than it's a choice if you happen to be a bank clerk and someone walks in and points a gun at you and says, fill this sack with money or I'm going to shoot you. You know, a bank clerk under those situations would be understood to be not acting of their own free will if they fill the sack with money, because, you know, their lives are more important. So this is one of the most disturbing things is that cults like Jehovah's Witnesses, you know, people who are defending them and apologists will say, oh, well, you know, you chose this path, Lloyd. You know, nobody made you do it. No, actually, I was made to do this because I genuinely feared for my life.
That's that coercive element to it, that when they don't let you identify the religious messaging they give you as coercion, then it disarms you from being able to see it as a coercive relationship. And I think that's why they're starting at the age of children, and they're, you know, you talked about how Jehovah's Witness governing body was more interested in children being indoctrinated to show deference to the group, to submit their lives to the group. And this is when it starts. So you have that relationship with the organization that is rotten at its core because it is based on coercion. And if you start that as a child, and then you start coloring anything that would free someone's mind from that level of control with words like darkness or apostasy or you know, any of these negative things, then it creates this aura of fear, so that eventually if they ever encounter something that would make them doubt, it makes their mind go to a dark place. And I think, Chris, go ahead.
Well, I thought this was a perfect segue to, you know, what we had prepped here, because I have a couple of videos to put together here or show. And I want to, you know, I want to say here first off for myself that I want to reiterate that, you know, we're faced with difficult choices with children, because you have facts and objective evidence and things to teach children, reading, writing, arithmetic, all that. And there's a lot of folks out there who think that their religion is just as true as arithmetic. or as biology, right? It's like just as true. It's at the same level. In fact, it's even more true. And so therefore they don't look at indoctrinating their kids into this as potentially coercive or abusive. And yet my position is exactly the opposite. I definitely believe that religious indoctrination of children in only one belief system is a kind of abuse, because I think you're limiting that child's ability to think. You're locking him into a particular worldview and mindset from which the child has no critical thinking skills or experience to be able to think outside that box. And you're the one, as a parent or as a minister or as a religious figure, who is creating that box. And the child's not coming up with it. It's indoctrination. And so that's my problem with it at a fundamental level. And more specifically, and leading into this video here, I want to point out that the indoctrination that we're going to show here, or at least starting off here, is also about obedience and authority, and teaching children that the worldly figures of the church are to be obeyed without question. It's not a matter just of teaching that God's word is to be obeyed without question. It's that the Pope or the world leaders are also supposed to be obeyed without question. And when indoctrination goes in that direction, you're not just indoctrinating religious belief, you're indoctrinating a chain of authority that this child is supposed to somehow just follow without question. And unquestioning commitment on the part of a child, like, you better be sure you know what you're talking about, because you're putting something in place for this kid in his head that he's going to have there for the rest of his life. And that's important.
That's a great segue. What I'd like for the viewers to do as we go into this video is to kind of contrast the different ways that you would approach a child about how to look at the world around them. Now, Lloyd, you've talked on your interviews and channels about the way that you are raising your young daughter and how she is to look at and examine things. And if somebody was to come to you and say, well, Lloyd, you are indoctrinating your child just no different from Jehovah's Witness indoctrination. It's just a different flavor of indoctrination. How would you respond to that? And for the viewers, when we go into this video, I want you to just look at the difference between the way that you're instructing children, the reasons and the types of analyses that you're giving as a tools to your children to look at the world around them. How do you respond to it?
I would say, and do say, because I do get people saying that to me, I need to have a doctrine to indoctrinate. I can't indoctrinate my child into something if there is literally no
Scientism
doctrine
is your doctrine, Lloyd. Scientism.
No, I am passing on critical thinking skills. So, and I do that unapologetically. So Jessica is receiving critical thinking skills from me. And the whole point is that when she is an adult and she has these critical thinking skills at her disposal, she'll be able to make whatever choice she wants to make about what she believes or doesn't believe. But it's my responsibility as a parent to make sure that she isn't co-opted into any exploitative groups that coerce people based on supernatural claims.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what I would add as another dimension to that, if someone were to ask me about that, I would say, well, I want you to look at the boundaries and the consequences of exploring different types of thought that I give my children as a framework. If I tell them that they're able to look at the world around them, but if they go too far in one direction, or if they think about or do make some decision, then God is going to kill them spiritually, or that they're going to lose their family spiritually, then it's that element of negative consequences that are based on theological claims that are not justified that informs whether or not the decision is coercive. Now, I could educate them about consequences of actions and things like that, which are inherent to being alive and existing. But that's different from saying that God is going to punish you, or that you'll be subject to Satan's buffetings or something like that.
Exactly. Well, let's take a look at this and see which side of the line you think this one falls on. Let me let me share this screen
Chris,
here.
This video that I shared with you guys, in Mormonism, this video comes up a lot because it just seems really close to what we're taught as Mormons. But there's this international church that at one point, they have a YouTube channel. They published this video of a children's song, thinking that this is great. People are going to learn it in the church and it's going to be great. It's teaching a good principle. And when they posted it, they were blind to how toxic the message actually is. And it just went like crazy. Even other religions looked at this and were like, that is crazy. And people started saying this is a true mark of a cult, that they would teach children something like this. And the group subsequently put it down and tried to erase the history of it like it never happened, but it happened. And you can see that there's a degree of production value into this, and that it wasn't just like one local unit doing it. It's an international effort. So that's kind of the setup for it.
Excellent. All right, well, let's give this a shot here.
Always submit to the church administration, for their place by the God to lead the station. If we obey, then we will receive salvation. Sing
Okay, so I think we get the idea there.
You didn't
And
go where
that,
it goes into multiple languages.
yes, this goes on for 3.5 minutes, and it's these children singing, and then it goes into other languages of them singing this same lyric. And we got the lyric, and so that's why I just wanted to show that little snippet there of submit. They were placed by Lord God to lead his nation. I mean, this is definitely coercive. I don't know other word to use to describe
Oh, yeah.
this.
So yeah, there's like 3 verses. The first one is always submit to the church administration. So there's a message of deference to authority, blind deference to authority. It wasn't like, submit to the church administration as long as they are following their rules and not doing anything coercive and not abusive. It's not that. It's always submit. So if you disagree, if you have a conscientious objection to something that they're teaching or doing, none of that. You have to always submit to the church administration. Second verse, why? Why are these men in power such that we should always submit them? And they give you the reason, because they were put there by God for the Lord's administration. So there now is backing it up. Now there's a reason why you have to do it, and that it's God. So anything that these men say or do is with the full force and effect of God. And this is something that speaks very much to Mormons, because we have prophets and apostles who carry the priesthood, the power, and they are ordained to act as God's mouthpiece on the earth. And so it's that same fuel to this culture of complete blind obedience. And then the last one adds in the coercive element, which is that your salvation is in jeopardy if you do not do this. And that can mean spiritual annihilation. In Mormonism, it means eternal separation from your family relationships and loss of God's blessings. There's in Jehovah's Witnesses, I'm sure there's a whole colorful palette of things that would imply. But, when you look at the age of these kids that are singing this melody, which is simple, repetitive, and full of these 3 toxic ideas, which are, if you saw them in any other group, if any of our groups saw them in any other group, we're like, that's totally a cult. My prophet's okay, but that prophet's messed up,
Right.
I don't know. What was your take on it, Lloyd?
Instinctively you want to make fun of it, don't you? Because it's just so outrageous. But I find it genuinely very chilling to see children being overtly manipulated in that way, especially, I'm not suggesting that you can't find it chilling if you're not a parent, but especially as a parent, knowing how malleable young minds are, I struggle to see the funny side in that context, because this is a very flagrant attempt to, hijack young minds and to code them so that there is unquestioning loyalty to an authority. And as you say, it's a loyalty that has no caveats. No matter what you're told, you need to obey. So yeah, and unfortunately, as I'm watching it, I'm also thinking about the equivalent in Jehovah's Witnesses, which we're probably going to come to. But
yeah, actually, let's go ahead and throw that up there, because I think that is
before you get to that, Chris,
up there. Yep.
The thing you were mentioning, Lloyd, about kind of coding and programming children's minds so that they have this absolute deference, that can be exploited on an institutional level. As they grow up, the choices that they would have available to them are limited to things that the leadership would provide for them in their lives. But it can also be exploited on an individual level, where men put in positions of local authority, which have that same transposition of autonomy to now, it doesn't necessarily have to be the highest authority. It can be even your local authorities who get to be there placed by God, is that they are then put in a position where they can enact abuse on vulnerable children based on the fact that they've been programmed to always defer to the church administration. And so in Mormonism, we've seen this take the shape of bishops who sexually abuse children, and in some cases use the paradigm of repentance and having to go through a process in order to receive forgiveness, where they include abusive things in that relation, in that process, doing religious things under the umbrella of their authority. Now, if any of these things ever come out, the church will always deny it and say, well, no, the church is not responsible for the actions of that local leader. But what they're missing, the boat that they're missing here, is that the indoctrination, the deference to authority that is powerful in its effect on the young minds who already are dependent on their parents and on adults around them to be safe in the world. You know, they only know trust. You're not teaching them critical thought. You're teaching them absolute deference. That's all they know. And so the fact that the church has this level of indoctrination makes the children vulnerable, and absolutely the organization is culpable for their part in these abuses.
Yeah, and we got to be real clear here that children are trusting until they learn some reason not to be. So when you're giving children absolute, black and white thinking statements like this, always submit to authority, listen and obey, and this kind of thing, these are powerful words. Submit is not a tiny little word. It's a very strong word. And this whole and what you just highlighted there, I mean, the Catholic parallel or example comes immediately rushing to mind, as it should. Because when children are indoctrinated to believe that their religious leaders are infallible and must always be submitted to, look at the doors that could possibly be opened there with child sexual abuse and assault. And those children are literally have been primed to believe that this is exactly what they are supposed to be doing, is submitting to this person, giving into this person. And when this person then tells them, you are to keep this quiet, this is between you and me, this is our sacred special time, or whatever bullshit the pedophile, gives to the kid, when the kid's been primed to listen and obey, there's some responsibility on the part of the parent there with that indoctrination. I'm sorry, but there is, and I'm not trying to blame parents. I'm not trying to say the parent's responsible for a pedophile's actions. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the child has been primed to be put in a position where that child will be taken advantage of and then be told to keep it secret, and will do so by the teachings that the parent put there. Instead of, say, teaching the child, if you're ever in a position where things seem weird or something's going on or something seems bizarre, no matter who it is, let me know what's going on, right? Let me know what's happening. That kind of thing. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I think it's hard to look at those situations and say, well, the parents are to blame. If parents have grown up in this same milieu where they themselves are the victims of indoctrination, indoctrination doesn't magically disappear when you're 18 or when you get married or when you have kids.
That's right.
And in many cases, you have very fond memories of your own experience growing up. And so you almost feel proud to raise your children in that same tradition because you're blind to the dangers, and you lucked out and you weren't victimized yourself with some of these abuses. But I think it's been a wake-up call for many parents when they realize that the notions of the leaders carrying that inherent trust is something that is a vulnerability that can be exploited rather than something that you can always rely on. I don't demonize parents for that. I think that part of the work that you guys do in educating people can wake up people to the state of the danger that's involved in this. And so that's why some of the work that in Mormonism, we have a guy named Sam Young who's trying to educate people on the dangers of this blind obedience and these men having Brigham. Access to it. No relation to Brigham, okay. Thankfully. And so, it started out as Protect LDS Children. Now it's Protect All Children. And it's advocating for education and for institutions to be held accountable because, these institutions don't have to disappear for some of these problems to be mitigated. They can reform and change the type of messaging that they give. Unfortunately, a lot of that messaging is their lifeblood and their lifeline, so they're not going to change or reform it. What's your take on this, Lloyd?
Well, I was only going to say that without wanting to deviate too much from the subject of child indoctrination, which
yes.
Is a very worthy subject in itself. When it comes to child sex abuse, Jehovah's Witness materials actively say that it's the parents' role to protect children. So they basically wash their hands of the whole thing and place the blame entirely on parents and even to some extent on children, because there's footage of a convention talk that was written by the organization to deal with child sex abuse, and the speaker even suggests that, you know, children ought to be thinking about wearing modest clothing. So apparently it's the responsibility of the child to stop themselves from being raped. So yeah, don't even get me started on how Jehovah's Witnesses deal with this.
All right. I don't think we can have a discussion about child indoctrination without touching on that. But you were going to show us
I just want to be. I gotta say, I just want to be clear here that I'm not advocating to blame parents. What I'm trying to point out here is that there are unintended consequences, you know, of our actions, and when we don't think through what some of those unintended consequences are, that doesn't take all responsibility away from us. You know, and as parents, it is the parents' job. It's a tough job, probably the toughest job on the planet. And I acknowledge that. And, you know, there's no magic crystal ball or any of that to be able to tell the future. I'm just urging parents to think through the unintended consequences of their actions. Because it's not like they knew what was going to happen. It's not like they're to blame for, you know, any of that, for some criminal's actions. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to encourage, think through the potential consequences of
I think there's a difference between parents that are watching your videos and thinking about these things, seeing the dangers and educating themselves, versus parents that are still within the clutches of these organizations who are totally cut off from being able to see any other perspectives or any other points of view. And, you know, breaking out of that is difficult.
Tell me about it.
So
yeah, I get it, man. Okay, well, let's take a look at this JW one that Lloyd gave me here. This is listen, obey, and be blessed. Let me share this here. And Lloyd, you tell me when to stop. This is a 4-minute video.
Okay.
We are going to sing song 120. Listen, obey, and be blessed. Are you ready to sing with us?
Okay, that's pretty much it. So all I would say here is that, first of all, I think that this video is slightly doctored by maybe by Jehovah's Witness, because those aren't the original captions. I don't think the original video had the lyrics on, but the images that we're seeing and the kind of half-baked animation is from Watchtower, and this is a 2012 video, and I think one area in which I can beat both of you in terms of our former religions is the sophistication of the indoctrination in terms of moving into the realm of Pixar style animations. Because we were talking about this off camera before, and I asked Jonathan, do you have any equivalent to Caleb and Sophia in the Mormon church? And I think Jonathan said no. We have a series of, again, Disney grade kind of cartoons with these characters, Caleb and Sophia. And this was just an early prototype almost from 2012. Then we've had dozens of cartoons, usually 2 or 3 minutes long, dealing with a given theme or a given area in which children need to toe the line. Some of these cartoons have included, for example, stories in which Caleb and Sophia are frightened into thinking that they might die, just as people died in Noah's day if they fall asleep at the meetings. One of the cartoons released in 2012 was Caleb's mum telling him that Jehovah would be sad because he brought home the wrong kind of plastic toy. Another cartoon is guilt tripping Sophia because she's thinking of spending her pocket money on ice cream when she should be spending it on Kingdom Hall construction. And probably one of the most notorious cartoons was one dealing with gay people. And Sophia comes back from school and is talking about how one of her classmates has two mommies, and then gets lectured by her mother on why that's wrong, on how, you know, the original standard in Eden is for there to be one man and one woman. So this is, you know, what we've just seen is lame. It's tame by comparison of what we've seen in subsequent years. But that central message of listen, obey, and be blessed has been carried through right through to today with the cartoons that have been produced.
I gotta say, just going through those few lines, it was very clear, though, as primitive as this is, that these lines of indoctrination were well crafted, well thought out. You know, the messaging to these children is very, very. It's a very crafted thing. Every single word matters.
You listen, you obey, and then you are blessed.
That's right.
And blessing means not just, oh, good things are going to happen, but bad things aren't going to happen. In other words, you're not going to die at Armageddon if you do as we tell you.
Exactly.
Yeah, and in fact, the same themes from that first video, where, you know, in this Jehovah's Witness video where it talks about you're listening to God's will being expressed, and there's no bones about it. That means what the Watchtower teaches, what the governing body teaches. And so if you're making an equivalence of what they teach as God's will, then you've got the same exact idea that's in that first video. And then, you know, that includes, as Lloyd pointed out, the flip side of being blessed. And that's if you don't obey, then your salvation is in stake.
Exactly. Now, and it's only one or two words away. You know, I want you guys to think about out in the audience there when you look at this stuff and you think, well, this isn't bad messaging if you know, believe in God and this kind of thing. It's all true. Well, if you do listen and obey, then you will be blessed and all that. Okay. Well, if you're missing the point that we're talking about indoctrinating in the direction of obeying other human beings, not God, right? There is that little factor. But also, if this might help tip the scale at all for anybody out there, imagine instead of these, if these videos were not preaching, you know, an authoritarian sort of obedience to God, what if they said the same thing about the government, about the president of the United States?
Indeed.
Right? Listen, obey, be blessed, right? But it's the president.
I just want to add as well that you cannot underestimate how appealing, I mean, what we've just seen is very primitive artwork. If your viewers haven't seen Caleb and Sophia yet, just type it into YouTube and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's very sophisticated animation. And just to kind of highlight the appeal that this has on young minds, I have with me in the bunker my collection of Watchtower materials, and I have like a display section where I can display things. And one of the things I display is the 2012 original Caleb and Sophia inaugural DVD, which has a picture of Caleb on the front flying his toy airplane. And very frequently, because my bunker opens out onto our garden, Jessica will knock on the door and she'll want to come inside, you know, where Daddy works. And she'll come in, and almost every single time she gravitates towards that DVD because of how appealing and attractive the artwork is to a child.
Well, let me...
and I try and...
I think I've got a screenshot here of this. Let me throw this up here and tell me what you...
I remember when I first encountered Caleb and Sophia. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Caleb and Sophia.
Visiting Bethel. Oh, this is alive.
This is...
Okay, so this is just integrated.
With that's Caleb and Sophia visiting Bethel.
Okay.
which is what all Jehovah's Witness kids are expected to do. It was even likened, I think Tony Morris put it this way. He said, you know, if your kids have been to Disneyland but they've not been to Bethel, you know, something's wrong there.
Right.
But these characters are designed deliberately in a way that's extremely appealing to children, even children like Jessica, who've so far managed to be raised in a total vacuum of Jehovah's Witness dogma. And that's been no easy thing, by the way, because we live with Jehovah's Witness in-laws. So there's been some conversations there. But the very fact that whenever she comes into the bunker, she's almost immediately drawn to that. And I have to use it, you know, to kind of sit down with her and use it as a teaching opportunity. It just kind of highlights how insidious this stuff is. I mean, these groups know how to tap into young minds, and they're willing to go to great lengths to do that.
Yeah, if Scientology ever gets on board with this, they'll be doing exactly these things. They will.
There's
be
a lot of
designing...
potential there too. You know, Lord Xenu and all the things. There could be some really cool cartoons and all of that.
Yeah, of
that,
course.
Actually. That's,
Hey, I wanted to make a point,
like a
Lloyd,
Thundercat style cartoon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
John.
fact that all of these videos and these concepts carry this theme about authority and religious spiritual authority, speaking for God type of authority, it really, when you compare somebody who might come to you or I and say, well, you know, when you teach your children, you're indoctrinating them the same way. The thing about the importance of that authority is it short circuits logic, reason, and conscience. It allows the group to say, well, you need to obey and follow this message, not because it makes logical, consistent sense, not because it follows the rules of science and what we understand about the world around us, not even because it's necessarily loving and right according to the way the world see things. It's only because these men have been given the special status of being the spokesperson for God or representing God. That is the one lever that you have to use to follow them. So if you're a viewer and you're looking at this and you're considering your own religious tradition and paradigm, just ask yourself, you're like, is there anything about my religion that if I took away the notion that these teachings came from God and instead they were just, you know, the ramblings of some adult person based on their own biases and prejudices and desire for power and attention, is there anything that I would then recalculate, revisit, and say, well, maybe those things aren't right. Maybe those things that I perceive as loving are actually damaging. I can imagine a Jehovah's Witness in that position would say, well, wait a second, if these men don't actually speak for God, then the idea that I haven't held my grandchild because their parents are apostates for the first 10 years of their life is actually really damaging. It's really bad. It's terrible. If these people don't speak for God, the only reason that some of these hurtful ideologies have any power is because of this notion that these people speak for God, which is instilled from childbirth here. And I don't know how Scientology does that when they don't have the God paradigm for it, but I know that in Mormonism we're facing that, where, you know, the only reason that a lot of it makes sense in the minds of some people is with this keystone idea that the prophets speak for God. So what they say is right, but if they didn't actually speak for God, then I would love to drink coffee and tea and to, you know, accept my son and his husband or something like that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's just building exactly on what I was trying to say earlier as well. You know, it's just when all of when the indoctrination is all going in the direction of obeying worldly leaders rather than, you know, God itself, it seems to me that, I don't know, if I was part of a group where the whole thing was all about my relationship with a creator, you know, I don't know. I don't want guys in the middle of that. But I know that the structure of the JWs and the Mormons are that there are prophets and there are these people who are supposed to be interpreting that. So it's, I just, you know, I can't see myself going in that direction at all. I thought L. Ron Hubbard was a real smart guy. There wasn't anything divine about it. It's just L. Ron Hubbard was a real smart guy. And he was able to figure out all this stuff that nobody else could.
Scientology is almost uniquely geared towards, I would say, recruiting adults rather than exploiting child indoctrination. So that's why
Yes.
we're kind of it's kind of uneven, this conversation in some way,
Yeah.
because Scientology is basically pseudo psychology and making people feel important by, you know, sitting them down for therapy sessions and tapping into that need that adults have to be listened to. Whereas, you know, it's the other way around with Jehovah's Witnesses. We're not really interested in listening to what people have to say and hearing their life history and all that kind of thing. We just want to add to our numbers, and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses have realized that a very effective way of doing that is to indoctrinate children.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think that the age of the groups has something to do with that in terms of phases of operation. And, you know, where are you putting your beans? Where are you putting your attention in terms of growing your group? And Scientology hasn't gotten to the point yet where kids are that demographic or that target audience yet. They're just not, you know, they're still concentrated exactly like you just said on the adults. And I agree.
Let's hope the Sea Org don't watch this video.
I know, right? They
You guys
will.
are following. I'm just saying, by the time Mormonism was 50 years old, we had our own state, nation state. Everybody was doing polygamy. It was great.
You got, you know, what can I say? When you're right, you're
Obsessed
right.
with power, this man, isn't he?
I know.
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
we had
what
our
can I
own
say?
state. We have our own presidential candidate. It's fantastic.
Well, guys, let's. I think we've covered.
No, you didn't do the
broad
Mormon
strokes.
video.
Oh, the
I know
Mormon
we don't
video.
have
Yes.
time. The Mormon
okay,
video.
okay.
Follow the prophet.
Yes. Yes.
Jonathan
This is
Streeter,
straight-
barking orders at this point.
That's right.
We'll
Sorry.
know
That's
who-
pretty much how it goes.
Who really
Now here we go.
controls
This
podcast.
is the Mormon one.
You got to get to the verse at least, the chorus.
Adam was a prophet, first one that we know. In a place called Eden, he
I saw you take off your headphones, Lloyd.
Adam served the Lord by following his ways. We are his descendants in the latter days. Follow the prophet, follow the prophet, follow the prophet, don't go astray. Follow the prophet, follow the prophet, follow the prophet, he knows the way.
Wow, that was a little more primitive than the
Lloyd,
JW
I saw
one.
you take off your headphones, Lloyd. I had to sit through your flipping indoctrination.
Bloody loud. I don't know what.
Oh, that's Chris's fault.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah,
the
good.
words, the chorus, so it starts out, and there's multiple verses, but it alludes to biblical prophets. So you know it's legit because the prophets in the Bible, and we have prophets today. And then it connects the prophets in the Bible that needed to be listened and obeyed to the prophets today. And then the verse is ingenious because it's repetitive and it's straight and to the point. Follow the prophet, follow the prophet, follow the prophet, follow the prophet, follow the prophet. He knows the way. Follow the prophet, follow the prophet, follow the prophet. Don't go astray. You know, it includes the obedience. It includes the authority tied to divine command, because the prophets in the Bible were divinely appointed. The prophets today are divinely appointed. And it ties to that threat, existential threat, or coercive spiritual message, which is that if you go astray, then you're going to be faced with these spiritual, consequences.
I don't know about you, Chris, but I, for one, am very grateful that Jonathan made us watch that video.
I am too.
And I
Thank
have
you.
many, many thoughts on it, which is just a shame we're running out of time.
No, it's all part and parcel. It's now the Mormons have not yet put together a Sophia and what's this kid's name? Sophia and-
Yeah.
No, we're an international church, and we need to appeal to people of all different colors now that we no longer hold the people of the African continent and their descendants as cursed.
Oh,
So it's too much of a production value. So we've adopted more small, short videos on particular themes that use a very basic style of animation that are voiceovers, so they can easily be translated into other languages. And it's much more memeable.
okay. Well then,
Well,
that
our
makes-
Caleb and Sophia is, I mean, obviously they're I don't know whether they are white kids. I think the dad is Hispanic, but those cartoons get overdubbed with all the different languages.
right.
That's impressive.
Huh.
That's an impressive
Interesting
thought.
stuff. All right, folks. Well, this has been more than a little interesting, that's for sure. I've certainly learned some stuff this episode I did not see
I
coming.
think it's been chilling, hasn't it? I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know about you, but whenever I'm dealing with this issue of child indoctrination, and I come up against it so many times when I'm doing my JW broadcasting rebuttals, because there's all sorts of insidious ways where the issue finds its way into the monthly episodes. I feel myself getting enraged by it. So this has kind of been like an overdose for me, leaving me fairly shell shocked at just how manipulative these groups are. You know,
What is behind that rage, Lloyd? Like, do you think are you feeling like the debris of your life having been affected by the child indoctrination?
I think it's a combination of what was done to me, and also now that I'm, and again, I'm not saying you need to be a parent to understand it, but when you are a parent, particularly of very young children, and you see how vulnerable they are, and you see how ready they are to just do whatever they're told, it just adds an extra layer of evil when you contemplate what these groups are doing and the way that they are so brazenly hijacking young minds.
I agree completely, and I have to say that if I don't laugh about this stuff, I'm gonna cry.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically, you know, is where I kind of live on this, because it is. I'm in some ways, especially when it does come to kids, like you just said, I am on a little bit of a hair trigger, and I can get really, really, really upset about this.
Yeah.
And I try not to go there, because it would just kind of be a little ugly and maybe a little counterproductive for what I'm trying to accomplish
but
myself.
It's
I'm talking
worth
about
pointing
me.
out that this is the effect it's having on us, in case people are watching Three Apostates episodes back to back, and they see us kind of laughing and joking in the last one, and they see us rather, pensive in this one, and they're wondering why that is.
Yeah, there's, to me, there is nothing worse than messing with kids. I have a hard time finding a lower bar, because they are exactly like you just said. They are sponges for information. They are completely trusting because they have zero reason to think otherwise. It doesn't even enter their minds to not trust an adult unless they have already learned, been burned somehow, or have been prepared by their parents to, learn some critical thinking. And it's difficult. It is difficult because children are of an age. Scientology gets this so wrong. And I have learned over the years how wrong they have gotten it and how much I've had to unlearn about how children are have brains and bodies that are incapable of thinking certain thoughts yet. They're just not there. The wiring literally doesn't even exist yet. And a brain is not fully developed until it is 25 years old, around there. Not this 18 thing is a nice arbitrary distinction, but it's not a situation where you're talking about a fully developed brain or body. That doesn't happen until the mid-20s. So, this indoctrination that, they say in Christian camps, I think 9 or 10 or something is the golden years. Like this is a very worked out thing. We're treating this very, very, we're kind of just doing a fly through on this, but there's a tremendous amount to know about how detailed and organized and involved child indoctrination specifically is in these groups. And so I've tried to put this together in a fairly light way so we can sort of look at some of it and pop out, but I'm really glad you're bringing this up this way, Lloyd and John, because this is a deadly serious subject, and I does need to be acknowledged, and I would not have done that because I'm about this myself for my own psychology, So yeah.
You had an interesting call on your appearance on the Austin community of atheists, or atheist community of Austin, Lloyd, where somebody was asking about how to deal with family members that attempt to indoctrinate their child when they're trying to teach them critical thinking and not have them subject to that indoctrination. And your discussion there was really good. And I appreciate the gravity that you approached it with, And if the viewers want to see a more in-depth discussion of that, then definitely check that video out, because these are, you know, issues for a lot of us that have left these organizations. Many of us still have family, and I have to deal with that with my own kids. My kids came back from visiting their mom, and they had a bag full of scriptures. And, you know, it was almost laughable because I have like way more scriptures on my and more church books in my little library than their mother-in-law or their grandmother has. But she was trying to indoctrinate, like, if you ever want to read scriptures, then here's the scriptures. I'm like, girl, I got tons of scriptures. They can read all kinds of scriptures over there. You don't have to send them to me. But I'm maybe a little bit less rigid in how I allow my kids to be subject to them. They go to church with their mom, but that's because she's in the faith. But then we talk about it, and I just listen to them, and they tell me their thoughts and feelings, and I give them questions to think about. And so far, from what they've related to me, that's kind of they do have an independent way of looking at the faith that's different from what I had when I was a kid.
I think a lot depends on age as well, though. And the whole reason why Deanna and I disassociated when we did was because we wanted to make sure that Jessica in particular was raised without any influence. We didn't want there to be any excuse from our believing JW family for them to try and do what we weren't doing and try and indoctrinate our children. So that's why we took the stand of disassociating rather than simply fading, because we wanted it to be very, very clear that we weren't going to accept anyone trying to indoctrinate Jessica. And I'm very proud that Jessica made it to 5 years old before she even really understood the concept of religion. And I say that there was actually an exception where her believing her grandmother, my wife's mother, did actually try at one point to show her Caleb and Sophia. So that attempt was made despite our very, very clear instructions to the contrary, and so that caused, you know, quite a bit of acrimony at the time. But it did stay with Jessica, so that, as I say, she made it to 5 years old, and then it became clear that she was at an age where I needed to explain to her what the family dynamic was, and why things were different, and why, you know, for example, my dad has nothing to do with Jessica. So I sat down and gave this whole bad men thing. If you want to know what I mean by bad men, just type John Cedars bad men and you'll understand what it was I told Jessica. But when we explained the whole thing, and we explained what the bad men do and how they control people and they persuade people to stop loving each other, and they tell people that Jehovah is going to do things to them if they don't follow them. And we said, have you ever heard of Jehovah? And Jessica said yes. So she was, even though she was only 5 years old, and even though this brush with indoctrination was so fleeting, she still remembered that name, Jehovah. And when you've been through what I've been through and what Deanna's been through, I wish you could understand how heart-wrenching it is to go to so much trouble to kind of keep your child hermetically sealed from all this toxicity. And despite all of those efforts, for her still to know what that name means.
Yeah.
And how the individuals themselves become a force for indoctrination that the institution doesn't even have to do itself. It's like you have people trying to shove things into children's brains, even around the corners of your parents. I had that happen a few times with my mom. I don't think she understands what she's doing. She thinks that she's helping. She thinks she's bringing light to my children, but that's because that's her worldview. That's the only thing that she knows.
Ugh.
So it cuts close to the bone.
Yes,
one,
it does. It does. And I knew this was going to be that there was a lot here on this one. So I'm glad we were able to address some of this at the end here. This is important stuff. It's not easy, guys out there, being a former member of these groups. We run into this. We run into all kinds of things all the time that's very hard to explain to people who aren't us.
We promise a happier episode next time in which I will resume teasing Jonathan about magic underwear. I promise.
That's the spirit. Okay, guys. Well, any last thoughts or anything before we wrap up here?
No, I mean, just even hearing that small snippet of that song, it is now stuck in my head.
Ah,
So, you know, these things that are with you from your childhood do not go away, even when you're there.
I think I would just say that if you're watching this as a believing Mormon or a believing Jehovah's Witness or a believing any religion that is involved, if you're involved yourself in any form of child indoctrination, I suppose my heartfelt request would simply be, you know, take some time for introspection. Is your religion really so justifiable, and do your beliefs really hold so much water if the only way that you can get them to stick is by hijacking your child's developmental process to try and get these beliefs embedded in their brain? You know, surely if these beliefs are credible, are something that can be taken seriously, surely it should be a case of waiting until your child is an adult before introducing them. Why do you feel the need to hijack this process and to capitalize on the trusting phase of your child's development to give these beliefs a foothold? So that would be my heartfelt plea to anyone watching who is doing this.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thank you very much for taking part in this week. I always appreciate your time and effort and attention on this stuff. And folks out there, any questions, comments, or feedback, leave it in the comments section below here on YouTube or at sensiblyspeaking.com. We are interested in your feedback.
If I can say,
yes,
please support Chris Shelton's Patreon account, because he is getting hammered with demonetization at the moment. It is not easy to be a YouTube creator. Chris devotes a lot of time and effort into making these videos. And so those of you who are supporting him on Patreon are doing a huge service in making this information available. So please do support Chris in that way.
Thank you very much. Excellent, guys. All right.
I'm not going to shill for you, Chris. I'm not shilling for you.
I did not pay them to do that. Not at all. Thank you very much, guys. As always, this is fun, informative, entertaining, educational, and yeah, support the channel. Okay, guys. See you next week.
Take care.
Bye-bye.